Imagine walking into a luxury car dealership with $1 billion in a suitcase. You don't buy one Ferrari. You don't even buy 10. Instead, you buy 42 different cars, forget to hire a mechanic, and realize none of them actually have a steering wheel. Welcome to the Todd Boehly era at Chelsea. In just 2 years, Chelsea has spent over $1 billion on transfers. That is more than the GDP of some small islands. They've signed enough players to start their own league, handed out contracts so long they expire in a different decade, and yet they've spent most of that time stuck in the middle of the Premier League table. How is it possible to spend infinity money and still lose to teams built on the budget of a local grocery store? Is this a visionary long-term project or the most expensive midlife crisis in sports history? Today, we're deconstructing the chaotic science of the billion-dollar basement. The kindergarten strategy, collecting Wonderkids. If you've ever played Football Manager after drinking 5 cans of energy drinks, you know the vibe. You stop looking at stats and start looking at birth certificates. This is exactly what happened at Stamford Bridge. Chelsea's scouting department didn't just look for talent, they looked for anyone who still had their baby teeth. They decided that the best way to dominate the Premier League wasn't to buy world-class players in their prime, but to buy every 19-year-old on the planet who had a cool highlight reel on YouTube. We are talking about a strategy that feels less like a football project and more like a high-stakes kindergarten. Most clubs sign players to 4- or 5-year deals. Chelsea? They're handing out 8, 9, sometimes 10-year contracts. To put that into perspective, when some of these contracts expire, we'll probably have flying cars and humans will be colonizing Mars. By the time Mykhailo Mudryk finishes his current deal, he'll practically be eligible for a senior citizen discount. The logic from the boardroom is amortization, a fancy financial word that basically means spreading the cost so the Premier League's accountants don't throw Todd Boehly in financial jail. But here's the problem. Football isn't played on a spreadsheet. In the real world, when you give a 20-year-old an 8-year guaranteed mega contract, you aren't just buying their future. You might be accidentally buying their motivation to retire early. Why run through a brick wall for the badge when you're getting paid until the year 2032, regardless of whether you score a goal or hit the corner flag? The result is a squad that feels like an international airport lounge. You have dozens of Wonderkids from South America, France, and Belgium, all standing around looking at each other, wondering who is actually supposed to be the adult in the room. There's no hierarchy, no veteran leadership, just a bunch of teenagers trying to solve a billion-dollar puzzle while the world laughs. It's like trying to build a skyscraper using only expensive Lego bricks but forgetting to buy the cement. They have the pieces, they have the shine, but they have absolutely zero stability. It's not a team, it's a collection of what-ifs and maybes locked in a golden cage for the next decade. The musical chairs. Who's playing today? If you walk into the Chelsea dressing room at Cobham, the first thing you'll notice isn't the high-tech equipment or the luxury amenities. It's the lack of chairs. When you have a squad of over 40 professional players, the pre-match team talk starts looking less like a tactical briefing and more like a crowded subway car during rush hour. In fact, things got so ridiculous that some players reportedly had to get changed in the hallway because the actual dressing room was physically full. Imagine being a multi-millionaire athlete and having to put your socks on next to a fire extinguisher because Todd Boehly bought 3 more left wingers while you were in the shower. This is the musical chairs phenomenon. In a normal club, you have a starting 11, a few reliable substitutes, and some youth prospects. At Chelsea, you have an entire army. For a manager, this isn't a luxury of choice, it's a logistical nightmare. How do you build team chemistry when half the players don't even know each other's last names? How do you practice 11-on-11 drills when you have enough people for a small tournament? The tactical result on the pitch is what experts call expensive confusion. Because the squad is so bloated, no player ever feels safe, but more importantly, no player ever gets a rhythm. One week you're the star striker, the next week you're not even on the bench because the club just signed a teenager from Brazil who plays in your exact same position. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces keep changing shapes every 10 minutes. The most hilarious part is the lack of balance. Chelsea's recruitment strategy feels like a teenager playing FIFA with a cheat code for infinite money, but only buying the players with the highest speed rating. You end up with 5 players who all want to occupy the same square inch of the left wing, but 0 players who actually know how to stand in the box and kick the ball into the net. It's a billion-dollar collection of high-end parts that don't fit together. You have the engine of a Ferrari, the wheels of a tractor, and the wing of a Boeing 747. It looks impressive in the garage, but the moment you try to drive it on a Premier League pitch, the whole thing falls apart because nobody knows who is supposed to be steering. The Manager Carousel, the impossible job. Being the manager of Chelsea under the new ownership is like being a character in a horror movie who decides to go into the dark basement alone. You know it's a bad idea. Everyone watching knows it's a bad idea, but the paycheck is just too big to say no. In the span of just 2 seasons, Chelsea has turned their dugout into a revolving door. First, they fired Thomas Tuchel, a Champions League winner, because he didn't want to play 4-4-3. Yes, Todd Boehly actually suggested playing with 12 players because math is hard. Then came Graham Potter, the tactical genius from Brighton, who was given a 5-year project but lasted about as long as a carton of milk in the sun. Then, in a move that confused the entire planet, they brought back Frank Lampard as a babysitter manager. It was like hiring your ex-girlfriend to house-sit while you're out looking for a new wife. It was awkward, painful to watch, and, statistically, it was one of the worst runs in football history. After that, they brought in Mauricio Pochettino, a man famous for building young teams, only to realize that even a master builder can't do much when the owners keep buying more bricks while he's trying to lay the foundation. The problem isn't the managers, it's the impossible expectations. How do you implement a tactical philosophy when your squad changes every 6 months? It's like trying to bake a cake, but every 10 minutes someone walks into the kitchen and replaces your flour with sand and your eggs with golf balls. You can't build a culture when the players are more worried about who the next boss will be than what the current one is saying. At Stamford Bridge, the manager isn't a leader, he's a scapegoat with a whistle. The owners want long-term stability, but they have the patience of a toddler on a sugar high. They want a project, but they want it to win the Champions League by next Tuesday. It has become the impossible job because you aren't just managing a team, you're managing a chaotic experiment where the rules change every time Todd Boehly checks his Twitter feed. Every new manager arrives with a smile and a vision, and every manager leaves a few months later with a huge payout and a look of pure exhaustion, wondering why they ever picked up the phone in the first place. At the end of the day, Todd Boehly has learned a very expensive lesson. Football isn't a game of ultimate team where you just stack high-rated cards and wait for the wins to roll in. You can buy the best young talent, hire the fanciest analysts, and build the most expensive locker room in London, but you cannot buy time. And in the Premier League, time is the only currency that truly matters. Chelsea is currently a billion-dollar construction site with no blueprint. They have the bricks, the gold, and the workers, but they're still trying to figure out if they're building a palace or a parking lot. Whether this chaotic experiment eventually works or becomes the biggest cautionary tale in sports history, only time and perhaps another $1 billion will tell. But what about you? If you were handed $1 billion to fix Chelsea, who's the first person you'd fire and the first player you'd buy? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the billion-dollar basement, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more football chaos. Until next time, keep your contracts short and your patience long.